The dinner party at the penthouse was flawless. Crystal stems catching the Manhattan skyline's reflection. The laughter perfectly calibrated. The wine vintage. But then came the glitch. A notification lighting up a phone screen left carelessly on the marble counter, followed by a glance between my wife and my best friend that lasted a fraction of a second too long. It was the moment the beautiful lie evaporated, leaving behind a cold, suffocating truth that I chose not to speak aloud, but to act upon in silence. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet, devastating spaces where love turns into cold calculation, stay with me, because the silence is where the real story begins. The rain in Manhattan didn't wash things clean. It just made the city slick and treacherous. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse on the 42nd floor, the streets below looked like veins of molten gold, pulsing with traffic. Inside, the air was controlled, scented with expensive candles and the lingering aroma of the rosemary roasted lamb we had just finished. "Ethan, are you listening?" Claire's voice pulled me back from the window. She was sitting on the velvet sofa, her legs tucked under her, holding a glass of Pinot Noir. She looked beautiful in that effortless way that had captivated me 7 years ago. Blonde hair catching the dim light, eyes wide and seemingly innocent. "Always," I said, turning to face her. My voice was steady, practiced. It was the voice I used in boardroom negotiations when I knew the other side was lying. I was saying that Mark suggested we weekend in the Hamptons next month. He says the beach house is practically empty this time of year. It would be good for us, don't you think? Mark, my best friend, my partner in the firm, the man who had stood beside me at the altar, clapping me on the shoulder, swearing brotherhood. I walked over to the kitchen island to pour myself a whiskey. My phone was sitting there, next to hers. They were identical models, both encased in black leather. A vibrating hum buzzed against the marble countertop. It wasn't my phone. The screen on Claire's phone lit up. A preview message flashed across the locked display. It was from a contact saved simply as M. "Can't wait for the Hamptons, just us. He doesn't suspect a thing." The message lingered for 3 seconds before the screen went black again. 3 seconds. That was all it took to dismantle a decade of loyalty. I didn't gasp. I didn't drop my glass. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me, a sensation akin to the numbing cold of a winter draft. My heart didn't race. It slowed down, beating with a heavy, deliberate thud. He doesn't suspect a thing. "Ethan!" Claire called out again, a hint of impatience in her tone. I picked up my whiskey, took a sip, and let the burn ground me. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the slight tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tapped nervously against the wine glass. Realized then that the nervousness wasn't about work or stress. It was the adrenaline of deceit. "The Hamptons," I repeated, walking slowly toward the living room. "Sounds refreshing. Right?" She smiled, and it was radiant. It was the smile of a woman who thought she had won the lottery without buying a ticket. "Mark is so thoughtful to offer." "Very thoughtful," I agreed. I sat down in the armchair opposite her. The distance between us was only a few feet, but in my mind, the continental drift had already begun. I watched her sip her wine, oblivious to the fact that the man sitting across from her was no longer her husband. He was now an observer, a strategist. Tonight, I would finish my drink. I would ask her about her day. I would turn off the lights and lie in bed next to her, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. But tomorrow would be different. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't throw her clothes off the balcony. I wouldn't punch Mark in the face, satisfying as that might be. Those were reactions of a man who still hoped to fix things. I had no such intention. In the world of high-stakes finance, when an asset becomes a liability, you don't argue with it. You liquidate it. You cut your losses, and you do it before the market opens. "Is everything okay?" Claire asked, tilting her head. "You're so quiet tonight." I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, watching the light fracture through the crystal. "I'm just thinking, Claire," I said softly, "just thinking about the future." She smiled again, reassured, unaware that she was no longer in it. The morning sun sliced through the blinds of my corner office in Midtown, casting bars of light across the mahogany desk like a prison cell. But I wasn't the prisoner. Not anymore. I sat opposite James Sterling. No relation, simply the most ruthless divorce attorney in the tri-state area. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He simply slid a manila folder across the polished surface of the desk. "The private investigator is already on retainer," James said, his voice dry as parchment. "We'll have the geolocation data and photographic evidence by the weekend. If they go to the Hamptons as planned, it's a wrap. New York is a no-fault state, Ethan, but given the prenup clauses regarding infidelity and reputation damage, you can leave with everything you came in with. And then some." I placed my hand on the folder. It felt heavy, weighted down by the ghost of a marriage that was effectively over. "I don't want a public spectacle, James. I want a surgical extraction." "Understood," James nodded, capping his pen. "We draft the papers, hold them in escrow, and serve them only when the assets are secured. Speaking of which, I'm handling the portfolio," I cut in. James left 10 minutes later. I turned to my computer monitors, the glowing screens displaying the complex web of finances that bound me to Claire, and by extension, her family's floundering estate empire. For years, I had been the silent engine keeping the Vance family afloat. I had leveraged my connections to secure them low-interest loans. I had personally injected capital into her father's failing commercial projects to save face for Claire. With a few precise clicks, I began the uncoupling. I didn't drain the accounts. That would raise alarms. Instead, I initiated a series of transfers that looked like routine portfolio rebalancing. I moved my personal liquidity into offshore trusts, protected by ironclad privacy laws. I triggered the early exit clauses on the high-risk investments backing Mark's architectural firm. It wouldn't collapse today, or even next week. But in 3 months, when the quarterly review hit, Mark would find himself standing on a foundation of sand. A knock on the door interrupted the rhythmic clicking of my mouse. "Knock, knock. Got a minute for the genius?" My stomach tightened, a physical rejection of the voice, but my face remained an impassive mask. Mark strolled in, looking every bit the successful architect. Unbuttoned collar, designer glasses, that easy, charming grin that had fooled me for 15 years. "Mark," I said, not standing up. "What brings you up here?" "Just wanted to go over the schematics for the Hudson Yards project," he said, dropping a roll of blueprints on my desk, right next to where James's folder had been moments ago. "And to confirm the Hamptons trip, Claire said you were on board. It's going to be great, man. Just like old times." I looked at him. I looked at the hands that had undoubtedly touched my wife, the eyes that had lied to my face. The urge to reach across the desk and shatter his jaw was a living thing, a hot, pulsing entity in my chest. But violence is the recourse of the desperate. I wasn't desperate. I was prepared. "The Hamptons," I repeated, forcing a tight smile. "Claire is really looking forward to it." "She needs a break," Mark said, leaning back against the edge of my desk. Too comfortable, too invasive. She's been stressed lately. You know how she gets. I know exactly how she gets, I thought. She gets bored. She gets entitled. Actually, Mark, I said, looking down at a document I wasn't reading, I'm going to be tied up with the merger for the first few days. You two should go ahead. I'll drive up Sunday. It was a lie. I would never drive up. Mark's eyes lit up, a micro expression of relief and opportunity that he quickly tried to hide. Oh? That sucks. But hey, work is work. We'll keep the wine chilled for you. Do that, I said. He gathered his blueprints and headed for the door, pausing at the threshold. You're a good man, Ethan. Seriously. You work too hard. Someone has to pay the bills, I replied. When the door clicked shut, the silence rushed back in. I exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to scrape against my ribs. The trap was set. They would go to the beach house, thinking they had fooled the oblivious husband. They would feel free. I turned back to my screen and executed the final trade of the day. The sell order processed instantly. The first brick of their world had just been removed. They just didn't hear the sound of it falling yet. They left on Friday afternoon. I watched from the balcony as Mark's silver Porsche pulled up to the curb below. Claire hurried out of the lobby, a oversized weekend bag slung over her shoulder, looking like a teenager sneaking out after curfew. She didn't look up. She didn't wave. She just slid into the passenger seat, and they merged into the chaotic flow of traffic heading toward the Long Island Expressway. The moment the car disappeared around the corner, the penthouse felt different. It wasn't empty. It was purged. I didn't pack boxes. Boxes imply a transition, a negotiation. I wasn't negotiating. I spent Saturday methodical and swift. I took my passport, my birth certificate, and the encrypted hard drives from the safe. I cleared my browser history, logged out of the smart home hub, and removed my biometric data from the security system. My clothes, my books, the expensive watch collection she had given me over the years. I left them all. They were costumes for a role I was no longer playing. Sunday morning arrived with a gray, oppressive sky. I stood in the center of the living room one last time. It looked exactly as it always had. Pristine, expensive, and hollow. I walked to the marble kitchen island. This was where I had seen the text message. It was fitting that this was where it would end. I pulled the thick envelope from my briefcase. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I placed it in the center of the counter. On top of the paper, I set my platinum wedding band. The metal made a sharp clink against the marble, the only sound in the silent apartment. It looked like an offering, or perhaps evidence at a crime scene. I didn't write a note. There was nothing to say that the legal statutes inside the envelope didn't cover. Explanations are for people who care about closure. I only cared about erasure. I walked out the door, keyed in the code to engage the locks, and dropped my key fob down the garbage chute in the hallway. I took the elevator down, walked past the doorman with a nod, and stepped into a waiting Uber. JFK Airport, I said. 6 hours later, Claire returned. The Porsche idled downstairs, but Mark didn't come up. They were being discreet, maintaining the illusion until the very end. Claire hummed as she unlocked the door. Her skin flushed from the sun and the salt air, her mood buoyed by a weekend of stolen affection. "Ethan?" she called out, dropping her bag in the foyer. "I'm back. Traffic was a nightmare." Silence answered her. Not the peaceful silence of a resting home, but the heavy, stagnant silence of a vacuum. "Ethan?" She walked into the living room, frowning. The lights were off. The curtains were drawn. The air conditioning was set a few degrees too low, making the air bite. "Are you here?" she muttered, pulling her phone out to check for messages. Nothing. She walked into the kitchen to pour a glass of water, and that was when she saw it. The white envelope sat on the dark marble like a beacon. The ring on top caught the dim light from the hallway. Claire froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and picked up the ring. It felt cold. She looked at the papers beneath it. The legal jargon at the top was bold and unmistakable. Superior Court of New York, Family Division. "No," she whispered. A nervous laugh escaped her lips, brittle and confused. "What is this?" She grabbed her phone and dialed my number. "The number you have dialed is not in service or has been disconnected. Please check the number and try again." She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at the screen as if it had betrayed her. She tried again. Same result. She opened WhatsApp. My profile picture was gone. My status was blank. Messages sent. One gray tick. Blocked. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through her confusion. She ran to the bedroom. The closet door was open. My suits were there. My shoes were there. But the safe was open and empty. The drawers felt ransacked not by a thief, but by a ghost. She ran back to the kitchen, clutching the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. The reality crashed down on her, not as a wave, but as a landslide. He knew. He had known all along. And he hadn't screamed. He hadn't fought. He had simply deleted himself. "Ethan!" she screamed into the empty apartment, the sound bouncing off the glass walls that separated her from the city. But for the first time in 7 years, no one was listening. The first 3 months felt like a vindication. With Ethan gone, the penthouse no longer felt like a museum of silence. It became a playground. Mark moved in 2 weeks after the papers were signed. We told ourselves it was bold, a declaration that we weren't afraid of the world. We drank the expensive wine Ethan had left behind and slept in until noon, convincing ourselves that his departure was a surrender. He had run away, we said. He was too weak to fight for me. "He never understood you," Mark whispered one evening, tracing the line of my jaw as we stood on the balcony. The city lights were a blur of bokeh below us. "He treated you like an asset. I treat you like a woman." I leaned into his touch, desperate to believe him. The narrative was seductive. The cold, calculating husband versus the passionate, artistic lover. It was the story I told my friends, even as their replies to my texts grew slower. Their invitations to galas and charity auctions becoming noticeably scarce. But freedom, I was learning, had a maintenance cost. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. I was at lunch at Le Bernardin with 2 women I had known since college. The conversation was stilted. They asked about Mark with polite, tight smiles, eyes darting to each other, whenever I spoke too enthusiastically about our new chapter. When the bill came, I handed the waiter the platinum card, the supplemental one attached to the primary account Ethan used to manage. I hadn't thought twice about it. The divorce settlement gave me the apartment, so surely the lifestyle came with it. The waiter returned 3 minutes later. He didn't lean down to whisper discreetly. He stood tall, holding the card between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance. The card has been declined. The issuer indicates the account has been closed." My cheeks burned. "That's impossible. Try it again." "We tried twice, ma'am. I had to use my personal debit card, the one linked to my dwindling trust fund." The look on my friends' faces wasn't sympathy. It was pity. pity mixed with a cruel sort of satisfaction. I went home early, the humiliation sitting heavy in my stomach. I found Mark in the living room, pacing, a glass of bourbon in his hand. It was 2 p.m. "You're home early," I said, dropping my purse on the sofa. "The Hudson Yards deal is dead," Mark said, not looking at me. He took a swig of the drink, his movements jerky. "They pulled the financing, just like that. No explanation, just a generic email from the Capital Group." "Can't you find another backer?" I asked, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. Mark spun around, his eyes wild. "You don't get it, Claire. That Capital Group was a subsidiary of Sterling Holdings. I didn't know until today. Ethan, he didn't just leave, he took the foundation with him." "He can't do that," I argued, though a cold dread was spreading through my chest. "It's business. It's separate." "With men like him, nothing is separate," Mark snapped. It was the first time he had raised his voice at me. He caught himself, softening his expression, but the edge remained. "It's fine. We don't need him. I have other contacts. We'll pivot." He walked over and hugged me, but his body felt tense, rigid. I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heart hammer against his ribs. It wasn't the steady, assured rhythm I was used to with Ethan. It was frantic. I looked over Mark's shoulder at the apartment. It was still beautiful, still grand. But for the first time I noticed the dust settling on the high shelves, the way the light hit a scuff mark on the floor that hadn't been fixed. The invisible army of cleaners and maintenance staff that Ethan managed had vanished along with him. "We're free," Mark murmured into my hair, sounding like he was trying to convince himself. "Yes," I whispered back. "We're free." But as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the room, the freedom felt less like a liberation and more like a free fall. We were falling, hand in hand, waiting for the ground to rush up and meet us. 2 years is a long time to hold your breath, waiting for a miracle that never comes. The rain lashed against the windows of the leased apartment in Queens. It was a far cry from the floor-to-ceiling glass of the Manhattan penthouse, where the weather was just scenery. Here, the weather was an intrusion, a noisy reminder of the insulation stripping away from Claire's life. Claire sat at the laminate dining table, surrounded by a fortress of white envelopes. Final notice. Past due. Legal action imminent. The Vance family business, a legacy spanning 3 generations, was bleeding out. Without Ethan's silent maneuvering, the restructuring of debts, the quiet calls to bankers, the strategic hedging, the company was exposed for what it really was, an archaic relic unable to survive the modern market. The front door slammed open. Mark stumbled in, shaking a wet umbrella onto the cheap hardwood floor. He looked older. The charm that had once seemed boyish now looked haggard. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from work, but from stress and the afternoon scotch he'd been using to medicate it. "Don't start," Mark snapped before she could even speak. He loosened his tie, throwing his jacket onto the sofa. The investors backed out. Again. They claim the risk profile is too high. "Mark," Claire said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "We need to pay the vendor for the fabric shipment. If we don't, the factory stops tomorrow. I checked the joint account to transfer the funds. It's empty." Mark froze. He turned his back to her, pretending to busy himself with the coffee machine. "There was a liquidity issue. I had to move some things around." "Move things around?" Claire stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. "That was $80,000, Mark. It was the last of the liquidity. Where is it? He spun around, his face flushing with defensive anger. I put it into crypto futures. I had a tip. It was supposed to double by noon. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire stared at him, feeling the room spin. It wasn't just the money. It was the sheer, breathtaking stupidity of it. You gambled it? She whispered. You gambled my family's payroll? I was trying to save us, Mark yelled, throwing his hands up. Do you think this is easy? Trying to fill his shoes? Everywhere I go, they ask about Ethan. What would Ethan do? Ethan wouldn't have structured the deal this way. I am sick of living in his shadow, Claire. At least when I was in his shadow, I was safe. Claire shot back, the words leaving her mouth before she could check them. Mark flinched as if she had slapped him. His expression twisted from anger into something ugly, resentment. Then go back to him. Oh wait, you can't, because he threw you away like garbage. You think you're the victim? You're the one who wanted the excitement, Claire. You wanted the bad boy artist. Well, this is the starving artist part. Welcome to reality. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the thin frames on the wall. Claire sank back into the chair, burying her face in her hands. The room was cold. She thought of Ethan. She remembered a night 3 years ago when a similar crisis had hit the market. Ethan hadn't yelled. He hadn't panicked. He had simply sat at his desk, poured a glass of water, and worked until 4 a.m., solving the problem before she even woke up. She had mistaken his calm for indifference. She had mistaken his control for coldness. Now, sitting in the wreckage of her choices, surrounded by unpaid bills and the echo of Mark's incompetence, Claire realized the terrifying truth. Ethan hadn't just been her husband. He had been the gravity holding her world together, and she had severed the tether. Her phone buzzed on the table. A notification from the bank. Overdraft fee applied. Tears finally came, hot and stinging. Not for the lost money, but for the realization that she was entirely, utterly alone. The meeting with the bankruptcy attorney took place in a windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and impending doom. You have 72 hours, Mrs. Vance, the man said, not bothering to look up from his files. He didn't call her Mrs. Sterling. That name had been legally stripped away, along with the credit rating, the social standing, and the protection. After that, the creditors will initiate the liquidation of the Midtown assets to cover the outstanding loans. The factory in Jersey goes first. 72 hours? Claire's voice was a whisper, thin and brittle. My father built that factory. You can't just sell it for parts. We can, and we will, unless you can present a guarantor with significant capital. 7 figures, minimum. Claire walked out into the gray afternoon, the city noise assaulting her senses. Mark was nowhere to be found, probably drowning his sorrows in a dive bar, hiding from the reality he had helped create. It was up to her. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the contact she had deleted 2 years ago, but memorized a decade ago. She dialed. The number you have reached is not in service. Of course, she hailed a cab, giving the address of the Sterling Capital headquarters, the building she used to walk into as if she owned it. 20 minutes later, she stood at the reception desk in the marble lobby. The security guard was new. He didn't know her face. He didn't know that she had picked out the art hanging on the walls. I need to see Ethan Sterling, she said, trying to summon the authority she used to wear like a second skin. It's urgent. Tell him it's Claire. The guard looked at her, then down at his monitor. He typed something, picked up a phone, murmured a few words, and then looked back at her with a polite, impassive expression. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Sterling's office says he has no appointments today and is not accepting unsolicited visitors. You'll have to leave." Unsolicited. Claire gripped the edge of the desk. I'm his ex-wife. Just tell him." "Ma'am?" The guard's voice dropped an octave, hardening. "Please don't make me call the police. You need to leave the premises." People were staring. Employees in sharp suits Ethan probably paid for, were glancing at the disheveled woman arguing with security. Shame, hot and liquid, flooded her veins. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking a fast, retreating rhythm on the floor. She found a bench in a nearby park, her hands trembling so hard she could barely hold her phone. She had one card left to play. Sarah, Ethan's executive assistant for the last 8 years. Sarah, whom Claire had comforted through a messy divorce. Sarah, who had sent her a Christmas card every year until the separation. She dialed. It rang 4 times. "Sterling Capital, Sarah speaking." "Sarah," Claire breathed out. "It's Claire, please don't hang up." There was a long silence on the other end. "Claire, I really shouldn't be talking to you." I know he told you not to. But Sarah, please, I'm losing everything. My father's company. It's going to be gone in 2 days. I just need 5 minutes with him. Just 5 minutes to beg. Please." She hated herself. She hated the whimper in her voice. She was begging the woman who used to fetch her dry cleaning. "He's not in the office," Sarah said softly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He's preparing for the Winter Solstice Gala tonight at the Met. He's the keynote speaker." The Winter Solstice Gala, the event of the season. They used to go every year. Claire would wear a custom gown. Ethan would wear a tuxedo that fit him like armor. They were the golden couple. "Thank you, Sarah," Claire choked out. "Thank you." "Claire," Sarah added, her tone warning. "He's not the same man you left. Just be prepared." The line went dead. Claire lowered the phone. The wind bit through her thin coat. She had no ticket. She had no invitation. She had sold her last designer gown months ago to pay the rent. But she had to go. She had to walk into that room filled with the people who had ostracized her, stand in front of the man whose heart she had broken, and ask him to save her. It was a suicide mission for her dignity, but dignity was a luxury she could no longer afford. The Great Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed into a cathedral of wealth. Waiters in white jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne that cost more than Claire's current monthly rent. The air hummed with the specific frequency of old money, polite laughter, the clinking of crystal, and the rustle of silk. Claire stood near a limestone pillar, half hidden by a massive floral arrangement of white hydrangeas. She had managed to bypass the main check-in, using an old patron's card that hadn't been deactivated in the system yet, a clerical error that felt like divine intervention. But now that she was inside, she felt like an intruder. Her dress, a navy velvet gown she had worn to a gala 3 years ago, felt heavy and out of season. She saw women she used to brunch with, their eyes sliding over her without recognition, or worse, with a flicker of recognized pity before looking away. Then, she saw him. Ethan was standing near the Temple of Dender, bathed in the soft, artificial moonlight of the display. He was holding court. A circle of men, bankers, senators, tech moguls, surrounded him, listening intently. He looked sharper than she remembered. The gray at his temples was distinguished now, not a sign of stress. He didn't look like a man who had been broken. He looked like a man who had been forged. He laughed at something a senator said, a genuine, easy sound that Claire hadn't heard in years. It twisted a knife in her gut. He was happy. He was thriving. And he was doing it all without her. She waited until the circle dispersed, watching him move toward the terrace doors for a breath of air. This was her chance. Claire forced her legs to move. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stepped out onto the terrace. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. Ethan stood by the stone railing, looking out at Central Park. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the wind. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Ethan." He didn't jump. He didn't stiffen. He turned slowly, setting his glass of scotch on the railing. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not happy. Just blank. The way one looks at a stranger who has mistaken them for someone else. "Claire," he said. His tone was even, devoid of any emotional inflection. "I was wondering if security had missed someone." "I needed to see you," she said, stepping closer, though his body language created a wall she couldn't cross. "I tried calling. I tried your office." "I know," he said. He took a sip of his drink. "I received the messages. I chose not to answer." The directness of it stole the air from her lungs. "Why?" "Because we have nothing to say to each other, Claire. The lawyers said it all 3 years ago." "My father's company is going under," she blurted out, the desperation cracking her voice. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and humiliating. "The bank is seizing the assets in 48 hours. Mark lost the operating capital. We're going to lose everything. The house, the factory, the name, everything." Ethan looked at her. His gaze traveled over her face, noting the lines of stress, the fear in her eyes, the slightly frayed hem of her dress. He didn't look satisfied. He didn't look gloating. He looked clinical. "And you want money?" he stated. Not a question, a fact. "I want a loan," she pleaded. "I'll sign anything. I'll pay interest. Just don't let them dismantle my father's legacy. You respected him, Ethan. You helped build that company." "I did," Ethan agreed softly. "I built it to secure our future. A future you decided you didn't want." "I made a mistake," Claire whispered, the tears finally spilling over. "I am paying for it every single day. Please, Ethan. I am begging you." He watched her cry. There was a time when a single tear from her would have made him burn down the world to fix it. Now, he simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief. He didn't wipe her tears. He handed it to her. "I won't give you a loan, Claire," he said. Claire's knees buckled. She grabbed the cold stone railing to steady herself. "So that's it? You're going to watch us drown?" "I said I won't give you a loan," Ethan corrected, his voice dropping, becoming lower, more intense. "Loans are for partners. We are not partners. However, I am a businessman, and I see an asset that is distressed and undervalued." He leaned in slightly, the scent of his cologne, sandalwood and expensive tobacco, washing over her, a cruel memory of the life she had lost. "I will buy the debt," Ethan said. "I will acquire Vance Enterprises. I will pay off the creditors. The company survives." Claire looked up, hope warring with confusion. You'll buy it?" "I will buy it," Ethan repeated. "Total acquisition. You and your family will have no equity. You will have no control. The name stays, but the ownership is mine." "But what about me?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. What happens to me? Ethan picked up his glass again, looking back out at the park. You need a job, don't you, Claire? The market is tough right now. He paused, taking a slow sip. I'll need someone to manage the transition. A junior position. You know the files. You know the history. You can work for me. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. He was offering to save her, but the price was her complete submission. He would be her boss. She would be his employee. Take it or leave it, Ethan said, checking his watch. I have a dinner reservation in 10 minutes. Claire looked at the man she had betrayed. She looked at the city that was ready to eat her alive. She realized then that the Ethan she knew was dead. The man standing before her was a titan, and she was just another acquisition. I'll take it, she whispered. The conference room on the 52nd floor of Sterling Capital was silent, save for the scratching of a fountain pen against heavy bond paper. Outside the panoramic windows, New York City stretched out in a grid of indifferent steel and glass, moving on as it always did. Claire sat at the long mahogany table. She looked smaller than she used to. The frantic energy of the desperate woman at the gala was gone, replaced by a dull, resigned exhaustion. Mark was gone, too. He had packed his bags the morning she told him the company was being sold, and that there would be no payout, only debt relief. He hadn't even said goodbye, just left a note on the counter complaining about wasting his potential. It was the final pathetic punchline to their whirlwind romance. Sign here, James, the attorney said, pointing a manicured finger at the bottom of the page. An initial here for the transfer of the intellectual property. Claire signed. With each stroke of the pen, she wasn't just signing away a company. She was signing away her history, her father's name, and the last shred of her independence. Ethan sat at the head of the table. He hadn't looked at his phone once. He watched the process with the focused, dispassionate gaze of a surgeon closing a wound. He wasn't enjoying this. There was no malice in his eyes, no smirk of victory. That was almost worse. If he had hated her, it would have meant he still felt something. But this was just business. That concludes the acquisition, James said, snapping the binder shut. Vance Enterprises is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Capital. The lawyers gathered their briefcases and filed out, leaving the two of them alone in the room. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Ethan stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. He walked over to the side table where a small stack of items waited. He picked up a plastic ID card attached to a generic blue lanyard. Your orientation starts on Monday at 9 a.m., Ethan said, sliding the badge across the polished table. It stopped inches from Claire's hand. You'll report to the VP of Operations. He knows your background, but he's been instructed to treat you like any other new hire. No special treatment, no shortcuts. Claire looked down at the badge. Her photo was printed on it, a pixelated, unflattering image taken by security downstairs. Under her name, it read, Claire Vance, Junior Project Manager. Thank you, she whispered. The words tasted like ash. The salary is fair, Ethan continued, checking his watch. It will cover your rent and living expenses. The debts are cleared. You have a clean slate, Claire. Don't waste it. He turned to leave. Ethan, she called out. He stopped at the glass door, his hand on the handle, but he didn't turn around. Do you... She hesitated, her voice cracking. Do you ever think about us? Before all of this? Ethan stood still for a long moment. The hum of the building's HVAC system seemed to grow louder. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, carrying a weight that settled into the corners of the room. I think about the man I was, he said, staring at his reflection in the glass. He was happy, but he was blind. I don't miss being blind. He pushed the door open and walked out. Claire sat alone in the massive conference room. She reached out and picked up the ID badge. It was light, cheap plastic, yet it felt heavier than the diamond wedding ring she had once worn. Down on the street, she watched through the window as Ethan emerged from the building. His driver opened the rear door of a black sedan. Ethan got in, smooth and efficient, never once looking up at the tower where he had left his past behind. The car merged into traffic, a single drop of water in a river of red taillights, moving forward, always forward. Claire clipped the badge to her blouse. She was safe. She was employed. She was alive. But as the sun set over the Hudson, casting the room into shadow, she understood the true nature of her punishment. She hadn't been destroyed. She had been rendered insignificant. And that was the coldest ending of all.